Okay, let's continue on. There's a few more things that we want to do. We want to make it so that when the ball gets to the bottom, the game stops. We also want to add a score, and the score is how many times you have hit the ball. So every time it hits the paddle, the score should be incremented by 1. And then finally we should add, and also every time you hit the paddle, the ball should start going faster. And finally add a restart button that restarts the game. So let's do the easiest thing first, which is make it so that when it gets down to the bottom of the screen, the ball stops. So if the ball were to make it down to here, someplace in there, I want to make it so that the ball stops and therefore the game is over. So right now if I just take a look at the properties, I can see that I've set the ball's y coordinate to 264 down here. So I'm going to go to blocks, and I'm going to say if I've gotten to the very bottom, so I'm going to say when ball.edge reached, I'm going to check the y coordinate. If the y coordinate, so I'm going to come back and show you this again, if I were to hit a side over here, the y coordinate would be less than, you can see the y coordinate is 120. If I was hitting the top edge, the y coordinate would be 0 or something negative. So it's really when it gets down here and it hits the bottom and the y coordinate's like 270 or something like that, that's where I want it to stop. So I'm going to say when edge reached, I'm going to pull out another if statement. And so I suppose right after I make the ball bounce, I can check to see the y coordinate, and I'm going to, under math, I find my greater than, equal, etc. operator. So I'm going to click the greater than, and I'm going to say if the y coordinate of the ball is greater than, we saw around like 260, 270, so I'm going to say 265. So if the y coordinate of the ball is greater than 265, I want to stop the ball. So ball ball1 dot y. So if the y coordinate of the ball is greater than 265, I want to set that ball's speed to 0. So set ball1 dot speed to 0. So let's come back over here. I'm going to make it bounce once. And now it should be that when that ball makes it down to below, and I'm going to move out of the way now. When it gets down here, it's greater than 265 and hits the bottom edge, it stops, which is great, but now I can't restart it. So I could, disconnect, restart the emulator, etc. It would make more sense to put a button down here that allows me to restart the game. So I'm going to do that by going to user interface, dragging down a button. I'm going to rename this button right away and call it button underscore restart, or restart game. And I'm going to set the text to say restart. Then I want to say when this button is clicked, when button restart.game.click, what do I need to do to restart it? I need to put the ball up near the top. So I am going to duplicate this and drag this up, duplicate it again. So I'm going to say set ball1 dot y, and putting it up near the top, I'm going to say let's just put it set it to 30. And for its x-coordinate, I can just leave it where it was. I'm going to give it a new heading. And so for that, I'm going to go to Math, and I'm going to pick a random integer. And actually, heading. So random integer between, let's say between 30 and 60. So I'm going to have it headed up and to the right initially at some level. And I want to reset its speed. I don't want it to be 0 anymore. Let's make it 8. So now, if I go back to my, it crashed, so I'm going to need to restart it. Let me pause. Okay, so restarted it. It goes down, it stops. And if I go ahead and hit restart, it'll go up and I can play, make a bounce. If I hit restart at any point in time, it restarts it. And so that way, when it gets down to the very bottom and stops, I have a way of restarting it. Next thing I want to do is I want to add a score. And so I want to keep track of how many times it bounces off of the paddle. So for the score, I'm going to go to Variables. And I'm going to pull out the initialize global name to. A variable is a container that I can store information in and then retrieve the information back from that variable again. I'm going to call this variable score, which is the current score. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set at the beginning, it says initialize global score to, I'm going to put in a 0. And so I'm going to set it to 0 to start with. Then I need to go to my designer and put a place to put that score. So I'm going to use a label for the score. And I'm going to drag out a label. Rename it right away to label underscore score. And I'm going to change the text to score colon and then the value of the score, which is initially 0. So I want to make it so that every time this ball hits the paddle, score is increased by 1. So I need to come to my blocks and find where I detect that it's hit the paddle, which is right down here when ball 1 is collided with. I want to increment the score. So I'm going to go to Variables, and I'm going to say set. So if it has hit the paddle, set global score to the current global score plus 1. So I want the plus operator. And I want to get global score. And I want to add 1 to it. So now, every time the ball hits the paddle, this variable score is incremented by 1. So let's come back here, hit reset, it says score 0. I bounce it, and you'll notice that score did not change. Moving around. I bounce it, and score did not change. Actually, the variable score inside here has changed, but I need some way of coming to this label and updating the text of the label so it says what the current value of score is. So going to go to my label and say set label score dot text to, and I want it to say score colon and then the value of that variable. Under the text area, I have the join operator. So I can join this string I put here with that string I put there. If I want more strings, I can modify it by bringing in more strings. In this case, I actually only want 2. So I'm going to drag that one out. And so I'm going to say score colon space score colon space. And now I want to grab the global score. So I'm going to duplicate that, get global score. And so every time I collide, it is going to increment the global score variable and then change the label. So if I restart, And then I'm going to go ahead and bounce it off the paddle. You'll notice that it actually went up 1, 2, 3. See what happens when it bounces again. 4. So it started out at went 1, 2, 3. That was very weird. So let's hit restart again. Now you'll notice that score was on 5, and so it goes to 6. So it's keeping the last value that I had in that global variable. If you remember at the very beginning, I bounced it twice, and hence it was 2, and it went to 3. So I need to reset this value when I hit the restart button. So when the restart button is clicked, I'm going to duplicate this block, drag it up here, so I'm going to set global score to 0 because I'm restarting the game. So that resets it to 0. But not only do I have to reset the global variable, I should reset the label. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this, move it up, set label.score.text to, and actually I could leave it that way because I've set the global score variable to 0, so that'll do it correctly. So let's come back here. If I hit reset, you see it says score 0, and it's working correctly. And if I miss, the game stops, and then I can see what my final score was. Last thing that I said I wanted to do is that every time I bounce the ball off of this paddle, it should speed up. So I need to come into my code, and where I detect that I've bounced, which is when ball 1 is collided with the image sprite paddle, I not only want to change the ball's heading and increase the global score and change the text, I also want to make the ball go faster. So I'm going to duplicate this and say set ball1.speed to ball1.speed, and actually I want to use plus here. So I'm going to pull out the plus operator. So ball1.speed plus, and let's increase it by 2 every time that I hit the paddle. That will make it go faster and faster more noticeably than using a value of 1. So if I come back here, restart, I think the initial speed was 6, and you'll notice it's moving a little bit faster. And I'm going to go ahead and bounce it again. You'll see it's moving faster still. And bounce it again, and it's moving faster still. Idea being that eventually I'm going to get it moving so fast I really can't catch it because I'm a lame player. Although the way that this is set up is, there we're going pretty fast. And eventually, let's say on the next one I were to miss, and it would stop, and it's reset. And because of my reset, if you look at my code for my reset, I restarted the game by setting the speed to 8, so it resets the speed, and we're pretty much doing everything we want to do, and that's the complete game.